Chapter 51. Caught. Antony's POV. Valerius! Antony's own cry woke him, and he bolted up in bed, gasping for air he didn't need. His cheeks were damp with tears, and when he tried to dash them away, he found that his hands were shaking. Damn, he rarely dreamed, but it still wasn't rarely enough. It had been so vivid. Antony had found Valerius sprawled on the ground in a pool of his own blood, and then, as he held him and wept over him, his traitorous mind had supplied an observation. Wait, this isn't how it happened. He didn't have any blood left by the time I was through with him. Antony shuddered and thrust the thoughts from his mind, choking down a sob that tried to claw its way up his throat. It had only been a dream. There was no point thinking about it anymore. He cast a nervous glance at the naked form sprawled next to him and was relieved to see that he hadn't awakened Hanyu. Good. The last thing he needed was to be caught in a nightmare, especially after the dancing debacle. He'd thought his snapping would cause another meltdown, but the boy hadn't been trembling or crying when Antony finally peeled himself away from the wall to check on his offering. In fact, though Hanyu had been unusually quiet for the rest of the evening, he hadn't seemed at all downhearted. His bright smile had only faltered when Antony announced he was going to bed, and Hanyu weighed to see if he'd be scolded for slipping under the sheets alongside him, and as soon as Antony had made an impatient gesture of permission, his grin had reappeared and he'd snuggled close as always. No doubt Antony's offering was still nurturing the thought that Antony had meant to kiss him after they danced. The hell of it all was that the boy was right. Antony had been thinking about kissing him. It wasn't his fault. Hanyu had been right there in his arms, huge brown eyes wide from his near fall, cheeks flushed from dancing, soft pink lips parted in blatant offering. Who wouldn't have had a moment, not even a moment, just an instant, a flash of temptation? Antony's sour mood continued as Hanyu woke and took his breakfast. He was startled, however, when a knock sounded at the door. Hanyu raced to answer it, and Antony heard him offer a cheerful greeting to Bunta. The older man was standing outside the door, and, when he saw Antony, he gave his usual scowl as he bowed. "What are you doing here?" Antony didn't bother to address the glower. He was hardly in a position to complain that someone glared too much. "I'm here to take Hanyu above deck, my lord," the man replied levelly. "I thought he might appreciate an escort after what happened yesterday." After what happened yesterday, Antony hadn't been planning to let him go at all. But Hanyu looked pleased at the idea of leaving, and honestly, Antony didn't blame him. He knew he'd been unpleasant company all morning. Anyhow, what was his plan? To keep Hanyu in their rooms forever? He'd have to let him go back sooner or later, and he didn't feel like denying the boy anything when Bunta was crouching there, no doubt expecting him to be an asshole. He plastered on a smile. "That was very thoughtful. Will you be available to walk him back as well?" Antony wished he could do it himself. He wished he could escort Hanyu there, watch from the sidelines all morning, and then walk him back down without taking his eyes off his offering for even an instant. But then, if wishing could break the curse, Antony would have been skipping in the sunshine and stuffing his face with fresh strawberries centuries ago. "I can bring him back," Bunta confirmed. It didn't help as much as Antony had hoped it would, but it did give him the strength to offer what he hoped was a nonchalant nod. "Wonderful. Well then, I'll see you soon, Hanyu." He would have been a little less nervous if the damn fool had seemed a little bit afraid himself. Instead, Hanyu beamed, offered him a chirpy, "Goodbye, my lord," and practically skipped out the door. Antony had to fist his hands and clench his teeth to keep from clinging to the boy and begging him not to go, which was ridiculous, since all he would have to do would be to give a simple order. Why was his instinct to ask instead? After Bunta and Hanyu left, he paced around the sitting room for a while to keep from tearing down the hallway after them. He only relaxed once he was sure they would be above deck and beyond his reach. A glance at the enchanted paper revealed nothing from Titus, which was hardly surprising, but a lovely long letter from Claudia. Good. That would help to soothe his nerves. Antony had just sat down to read it when there was another knock at the door. "Hanyu, what had happened? Had something gone wrong?" Antony flew to the door with his heart in his throat. He yanked the door open, mouth full of frantic questions, and then swallowed them all when he saw the massive form of his lover standing there. "Hello, Annie," Marcus said with that dazzling smile of his. "How are you today?" Antony felt himself beginning to sputter and reached for his courtly training. It took him only an instant to summon his polished, smiling mask. "I'm doing wonderfully now that you're here, darling," he said. "Please, come in." Marcus followed him into the sitting room, and Antony gestured him to a seat and did his best to collect himself. It was all so strange. Marcus was the same as always, the same as he had been for 1,000 years. There were the arms that wrapped around Antony and made him feel safe in a way nothing else could do since the curse. There was the beloved face of which Antony had kissed every inch. There were the dark eyes, so tender as they regarded him. It was all there, everything that had made the man his comfort and his home for untold centuries. When they were cursed, it had broken Antony. He'd put himself back together, mostly, but it had taken so long and hurt so much. When he'd been broken for a second time, he'd known he couldn't face that process again. Taken alongside the first wound, there was just too much guilt and pain. That was when Marcus had sought him out. 400 years of intermittent pining, and then he had appeared at Antony's side as if summoned by magic. He had been exactly what Antony had needed. Where Theodora coddled him and Felix tried to make him talk about what he was feeling, Marcus would just look at him and say, "You're all right. You're too strong to let these silly things bother you so much." He'd said it so firmly even Antony had been able to believe him. Marcus had pulled Antony from what would have otherwise have become an endless cycle of self-inflicted agony, and he'd stayed at his side ever since. He'd made him strong, helped him realize and correct his flaws, improved him in every way. Marcus was his lover and his most important person. None of that had changed. And yet, somehow, as Antony looked at this man, more familiar, more dear and needed than his own body, all he could see was Han Yu's pale, terrified face after yesterday's incident. Antony took a deep breath. He needed to drop all his etiquette training and be blunt if he was going to fix this rift in their relationship. Honesty would be required, however unnaturally it came to him. He fixed his gaze on Marcus and asked, "Why did you harass my servant yesterday?" He'd expected surprise, maybe even annoyance. Instead, Marcus just smiled as though he'd been waiting for the question. "Harass? Goodness, Annie, I only asked him a few questions. What did he tell you I did?" "What? No, that's all he said you did. He didn't make anything up, he just—" "Then why am I in trouble? All I did was talk to him. Is there a rule against that now?" "No, but talking was enough. What did you think you would need to do to scare him? You cut an intimidating figure, you know. When you corner a human on his own—" Marcus interrupted again. "So, am I being chastised for existing? I can't help the way I look." "That's not what I meant." Antony's voice faltered. "I just don't want you to—" "To what?" Marcus smiled flirtatiously. "Be big? You never had a problem with that before, darling." "Stop interrupting me," Antony snapped. "Look, we both know you did this on purpose, all right? You wanted to scare him. Why?" Marcus's easy smile tipped, bent into a frown. "What the hell, Annie? You may run this ship, but I am the authority on my own mind and intentions, and I'd appreciate it if you could remember that." Antony was struck with the memory of his own words to Han Yu. "Don't tell me what I think." Was it possible that he'd been wrong? Maybe Marcus really hadn't had any intention of terrorizing Han Yu. Maybe— "Then why did you interrogate him about me?" he asked. Marcus's face went dark and hard, and Antony knew at once he'd said exactly the wrong thing. When he spoke, Marcus's face was terribly cold. "Well, when my attendant tells me that my lover conspired with his pet to fake a punishment for my exclusive benefit, I get a little curious. It's a quirk of mine." Fuck. Marcus. Now Antony was stammering, but what else could he do while his mind searched frantically for an explanation that didn't exist? Marcus just sat and watched him. Antony wished now that he hadn't complained about the interruptions. He would give a limb for Marcus to interrupt his fumblings right now. "It wasn't fake," he managed at last. "I really did cane him. You saw." "Yes, I did. And as soon as I wasn't there to see, you waived the rest of the punishment and told him you hadn't meant it." When was Antony's mind going to be capable of supplying more helpful words than "oh fuck"? "Don't make excuses." Marcus's voice sounded so remote that Antony immediately felt himself to be a child again, brought before a glittering throne for a scolding. "You lied to me." How was he supposed to argue that? It was the truth. "I don't even mind that so much as the fact that you brought him in on it. Why did you do that? Was it fun for you and a human fuck toy to laugh at me behind my back?" Fuck toy? Antony's sudden blast of hot rage took him by surprise. How dare Marcus say such a vicious thing about his Hanyu right after scaring him half to death? Nothing that had happened was Hanyu's fault. He's not a fuck toy, he snarled. Don't call him that. That's what you took from that statement? Marcus sparked a quick, incredulous laugh. Don't try to redirect the conversation. We're talking about how you and your attendant made a joke out of me. Antony's dungeon was still up. It never would have happened if you weren't being such a prick. Couldn't you just accept that I didn't want a sow and leave it alone? You could have just told me if you'd had enough of that game. I'm not a mind reader. I did tell you. I said over and over again that I don't fuck humans. Marcus rolled his eyes. With the way you've been carrying on over this Hanyu, how was I supposed to know you meant that? You're not stupid. I'm sure you were capable of telling me more clearly than that. Oh shit, is this my fault too? What if I had just told him to stop more firmly? Would that have solved everything without Hanyu being punished? Could I have prevented all of this if I'd just stopped trying to manipulate everybody and been honest for a change? Could I? This isn't about me. Antony met his lover's eyes. I'm sorry for lying to you, Marcus. We can talk about that as much as you want, but first you're going to promise me that from now on you'll leave my offering out of it. You're the one who involved him, made him part of your little joke on me, Marcus spat. That's another thing to be angry at me about, not him. Antony tried to keep his voice firm and level, and mostly succeeded. Say whatever you like to me, but I don't want you scaring him like that ever again. Leave him alone. That elicited the flicker of surprise that Antony had expected earlier. Marcus blinked at him, silent for a moment, and Antony could almost have sworn that for just an instant he looked afraid. Then he smiled so brilliantly that Antony knew he'd been mistaken. If it means that much to you, Annie, then of course. Marcus's smile dimmed and his eyes fell to the floor. But if you'll go behind my back like this, how much can I possibly mean to you? Everything. Antony slipped from his seat to kneel at Marcus's feet, clasp his hands, and shower them with repentant kisses. I'm so sorry. It was terrible of me, and I'll never do it again. Please, please forgive me. You mean everything to me. It had been true for hundreds of years, and indeed, the thought of losing Marcus made Antony so panicky that it felt like his stomach would claw its way out through his throat at the prospect. But when Marcus kissed him and whispered his forgiveness, it didn't feel quite as important as his promise not to bother Hanyu.